Thanks everybody for joining. I am Brad Parks. I'll be your guest presenter here for the next 20 or so minutes. I'm going to talk about Morpheus data, and this session, they wanted to do a little bit more like a TED Talk, so I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with it and go into a little bit of detail about where our software platform came from, kind of where it's going inside HPE, talk a little bit about how that impacts some of the vendor choices that you are likely making right now, and hopefully have some fun along the way. As I was pulling the slide deck together, it was a test for me coming back into HPE from being out in the wild until the acquisition last fall, because I had to only use graphics that were carefully prepared by the HPE brand people. So I did my best. I could not use the clip art and things I might otherwise do as a standalone. But one of the things I wanted to start with is that origin story about where we came from, because I do love it. It's one of the reasons I joined the company in the first place. And I put here, day one design decisions matter. Because when you're starting any project, the DNA of what formulated that idea in the first place has a lot to do with the trajectory that you take a technology in the future. And Morpheus sprang out of need. My former boss, now I guess I work for Antonio, but my former boss was a venture capitalist for a number of years. But about, I'd say 12 years ago, he started his own private equity company. He now has about $4 billion under management, but as a private equity investor, he would buy a half dozen companies in a given year. But his goal was to find companies where he saw a good business model, good opportunity to growth, but a lot of technical debt. These were mid-tech companies that needed the injection of some application modernization, some technology uplift to help them be all that they could be. So what he did, he hired 25 or 30 of the just top 1% application developers that he could find. And he gave them that mission: go into all of these companies that I'm acquiring and modernize their app stacks, new digital front ends, mobile apps, get them top of class technically so that he could go sell them and make a bunch of money. That team needed tooling to do their job. They would walk into very heterogeneous environments. They didn't always know what they were going to get. They were like the Navy SEALs of application modernization. And if I go back 12 years, they looked at what tools were out there to help them do their job. There were tools like Pivotal Cloud Foundry. For those who know the Wayback Machine, that was an application development platform that was great if you threw out everything you ever did and did it the Cloud Foundry way. That didn't really work for them. But they were also big fans of one of the first PaaS clouds. It was called Heroku. It let application developers very quickly provision application stacks into the Heroku cloud. But that also didn't work because they didn't want to be trapped in that one environment. So they went on this journey to develop a set of tools that would let them very quickly deploy applications into heterogeneous environments without having to wait on an internal IT team. That DNA is where Morpheus came from. It ran as an internal practitioner toolkit for about 3 or 4 years, and then the founding team said, a lot of enterprises are trying to do better software development, but classic IT processes just aren't suitable for that. So what we ended up with, if you look at kind of the problem domain inside IT and why public clouds have grown so fast, a lot of it had to do with the process that end users have to go through, right? If I'm an application developer or a database analyst and I ask your teams for, hey, I need a new 3-node MongoDB database or a multi-tier application I'm running into production. I stole this slide from one of our customers in the early days because they were walking me through the hundreds of steps that it took from the time that their end user stakeholders asked for an application to actually getting a production-ready application out the other side of that engine. And here at HPE Discover, right, we're looking at compute and storage and networks, but more broadly, inside your IT shops, there is a mountain of other tooling and technical debt. There are dozens of teams sometimes that have to touch that service request, right? That master-slave database, right? It needs an IP address, a DNS entry, a load balancer, VIP deployed. You might have to clone a virtual machine, run an Ansible script, set up a backup job, install a security agent, run a Qualys scan if you're in a highly regulated industry, forward some logs to a logging solution. All of that takes time, and it's very hard to do in a heterogeneous environment. That is the problem that Morpheus was born to solve, because that was a lot of what that Bertram Labs team was having to do inside all of these companies. What we did is we created a set of loosely coupled service interfaces that represent the natural life cycle of provisioning and managing an application. So it is a true platform, not a tool, Morpheus. We represent all of those technologies, all of those handoffs that traditionally have had to happen inside an IT environment. We're kind of opinionated on what that process looks like because we've done it a few million times over the years. We know what has to happen to stand up an application. But we're application-centric. If I go back to that DNA strand, there are a lot of tools that have tried to tackle hybrid cloud orchestration, but oftentimes they start from a different design center. They start as VMware tools that kind of grow up, or they start as public cloud tools that grow down, or ServiceNow, an ITSM tool that grew out. But all of the other players that we bumped into when we were a standalone usually had some other axe to grind, right? They were a hypervisor company trying to do orchestration, but they were really trying to maintain their cash cow of being a hypervisor. Or they were an ITSM tool, or they were a public cloud provider. Because Morpheus started from that practitioner basis, we started with the application. That's the center of our universe. And when we represent instances in our service catalog, we don't represent just VMs, because VMs honestly aren't that interesting. They don't do anything, right? It's the applications that run on top of those VMs. So we represent, yes, you can click a button and get a VM or a container deployed very quickly, but it's more fun to think about, well, how can I deploy a 7-node sharded MongoDB cluster at the click of a button? Or a multi-tier app stack that has a database, a web front end, a messaging queue with some boot dependencies. Those complex application constructs are what Morpheus can wire together and then give you the ability to present to your internal IT stakeholders so that they can provision very quickly, but you can still set guardrails and policies so you keep them in their lane. So while we're opinionated about the process, we are 100% agnostic about the tools that it takes to get there. Why? Again, back to that design center. The team that built this was walking into dozens of different companies, right? They all had different tools already in place. Like the Navy SEALs, they had to get in, modernize their tech, and then get out. So we use that platform framework and those service interfaces to then tie into the technologies that you already have on your data center floor, inside your IT organization. And one of our big customers, years ago said, my team's never met a tool they didn't like, right? They had a Windows team over in this corner, right, who were big fans of PowerShell, running Hyper-V, right, doing things the Windows way. Over here, they had a Linux team using Ansible, Docker containers. They had just done an acquisition that was big fans of public cloud, right? Oftentimes, the analogy I use when I'm talking to either HPE teams or customers are leaves, trees, and forests, right? There are a lot of tools that'll tackle a low-level problem, or you can look at a vertically integrated stack. Where Morpheus usually comes in and the problems that we solve are forest level problems. The way you provision things, the guardrails that you put around how resources are used, how you do things like cost management, those shouldn't be technology dependent. They should span all of your different application patterns. That's kind of how we think of the world. So with this framework, we not only can very quickly integrate with the tools that you already have, and when we say integrate, we don't mean go download a script and hand crank it, right? Handcrafting should be for beer, not for your automation strategy. When we say integrate with ServiceNow, you click a button, give it your service credentials, point it at your ServiceNow API endpoint, and we're going to do the rest. When we integrate with your IP address management system, same thing. We want to get you up and running quickly by having native out-of-the-box integrations. But the reason abstraction is so important is it means if you want to switch tools from, I don't know, Chef to Ansible or Infoblox to Blue Cat for your IP address management, making that underlying technology change shouldn't require you to do another 3 months of technical scripting. And that's often what we find with people who have tried to solve this problem domain just using a bunch of handcrafted scripting, is they'll code up a bunch of scripts to provision an application, right? That's not that hard, that can be done, but what happens is over time it becomes very brittle, and you can't change directions. You can't change the underlying tools or your hypervisors. So what we've built is a very loosely coupled domain so that you can change the underlying tools and still keep on rocking. So we're agnostic about tools, but we're also agnostic about where applications live, right? Applications have gravity, just like data. You've got certain teams that have an affinity for a certain cloud, right? You pick landing zones for certain reasons, but we want to give you a persistent and consistent way to provision workloads into bare metal servers, into VMware, into Nutanix, into Oracle, into AWS, into Red Hat, into Azure, into GCP. If we give you a consistent user experience, a consistent API set, a single Terraform provider, it's going to make it much easier and faster for you to get your job done and for your end users to get their job done. This is also where we start talking about virtualization, right? Hot topic, talking about vendor lock-in. Provocative statement, vendor lock-in isn't always bad. I was a Windows guy for a long time. I worked at HPE for a while before I joined Morpheus. The team there said, we'll give you a Windows box, but we'll make fun of you. We're all Mac people. So I got a Mac. And then my wife bought me a tablet, right? iPad. I'm like, wow, I can airdrop things from one device to another. So I'm all in. I might as well get an iPhone. Then I said, got an iWatch. Wow, that vertically integrated proprietary stack, I am getting disproportionate value from that, right? I was okay with it. Apple Pay works great, iCloud works great, I like it. If they started charging me $5,000 for my iPhone, I would get my Android out of the closet and probably boot it back up, right? It is an economic argument in a lot of cases, and that's what we've seen with changes in the hypervisor landscape, right? Anybody hear about, Broadcom VMware acquisition a while back? New news, hot off the presses right now. It's almost old news at this point. How many people thought they'd be at a trade show in 2025 thinking about virtualization as a primary domain, right? We thought we had this thing nailed like 10 years ago, right? It was great. Technology is great. Morpheus has turned thousands of VMware private clouds, or clusters, into private clouds over the years, right? We replace vRealize automation on the daily. That is our business. Most people thought they had this solved, but when Broadcom did that acquisition, prices went up, the economics changed, the value equation changed, and everybody started rethinking their life choices. That's where Morpheus VM Essentials came from. We took our expertise as Morpheus inside KVM. So we've integrated with KVM for years, right? Our core actual hypervisor that we would use under the covers when we would rough out a new concept years ago was just overt and libvirt with KVM. We've integrated with Nutanix Acropolis, right? Oracle OLVM, OVM, OpenStack. The public clouds use KVM. KVM's not new, but a standalone OS with KVM on it doesn't really do much for you, right? You need the upstack manageability to make sure you can move workloads from one host to another. You can do failover, you can do snapshots and backup. You know, that's what you get above just KVM. That's what we started working on about a year and a half ago, was taking our base level KVM that we'd been using in test and dev and in our demo environment for a long time, and started putting that upstack clustering capability around it. So now, HPE has a native KVM-based hypervisor that has the equivalent of workload placement, host-to-host vMotion, storage motion, right? We've got snapshots. We can coalesce those into synthetic full backups. We do hardware pass-through. You can do remote console into it. We've got, I think, affinity and anti-affinity rules coming this next release. We also have image conversion to get you from a VMware VMDK into a QCOW on a KVM box. We can also, as of the next release, start doing scheduled bulk migration, similar to what Nutanix Move does. So we've put a lot of time and energy into this built-in hypervisor. But honestly, as Morpheus, as HPE, I don't want to talk about hypervisors any more than you do. We want to commoditize the hypervisor and get you back to thinking about the cloud operating model. Thinking about how fast you can deliver new services to your end user customers, how you can enable self-service. If you can land workloads on a built-in hypervisor and reduce your costs by 90% along the way, absolutely, we want to do that. But we're still going to be 100% agnostic. If you've got teams that want to use VMware forever, awesome. We'll still turn that into the private cloud it should be. If they're using Kubernetes, we have a built-in Kubernetes clustering engine inside Morpheus. If you want to expose a Rancher or OpenShift namespace, but make it easier to consume, we can do that too. So it's all about giving you optionality and choice, but giving you built-in capabilities and a landing zone to land those workloads if we can help you save some money. One of the things I am most excited about post-acquisition, now that we're inside the HPE tent, is where we're taking this technology. So first thing we did before most of us even had @hpe.com email addresses last fall was to take the Morpheus built-in KVM clustering and the full Morpheus feature set, and we started looking at what are the core features that smaller enterprises, mid-market might need for a more virtualization-centric use case. Like I said, we've been turning VMware into a private cloud for a decade. We know how to do this. So we said, well, let's start to shrink the surface area, turn some of the features off that this market might not need, and say, how do we release a version of Morpheus that's tuned for a virtualization use case? And that's what we did, and it's what we launched last December as Morpheus VM Essentials. But we kept some of the core secret sauce. So Morpheus VM Essentials can continue to attach to your existing or new VMware vCenter environments, right? We can make it easy to do VM vending into vCenter and ESXi, but it includes that KVM cluster type. So if you want to start replatforming some workloads from VMware over to KVM, start to reduce your dependence, reduce your cost over time. That's what Morpheus VM Essentials can do for you. But we also brought some of the other things from the Upstack Morpheus feature set. If you're provisioning a VM, you're doing VM vending, it's going to need an IP address. So we decided to bring in our integrations into third-party IPAM and DNS entries. So you can connect to your Infoblox, your BlueCat, your SolarWinds, do that all day long. You want to automatically register that box to a DNS, awesome. We said, well, VM vending is one thing, but you want to turn that box into a database or a web server. You should be able to run a bash or a PowerShell script to do that. Some of our engineers were always annoyed they couldn't do that stuff from vCenter, so we brought that in to do basic task execution. Brought in our integration to identity providers, so you can think of Morpheus VM Essentials as Morpheus Lite, tuned for a virtualization use case. One of the key things, though, is it is licensed per socket, not per core. And that really means something particularly at scale. Pure play software vendors have to chase the core to monetize their software, right? As CPUs got more powerful, they were selling less software, so a lot of them changed to core-based licensing. Because Morpheus is inside HPE, and we do a fairly hefty business around servers and around storage and around networking, we can introduce a software stack that is pegged to the socket because we know that we're going to make it up along the way with the rest of the stack. And what that gives you is an opportunity to significantly reduce your cost around things like virtualization. So that's VM Essentials. I feel like a late night sales guy, but wait, there's more. Because VM Essentials is effectively, not even effectively, it is the Morpheus software stack. Version 8.0.6 of Morpheus VM Essentials is version 8.0.6 of Morpheus Enterprise. When you apply a license to that software, it gets an upgrade, right? Your 2-bedroom condo just became a 5-bedroom house with a 3-car garage, right? We've just exposed the rest of the feature set. And so we introduced some more upstack complex concepts. So if you want to do multi-tier application blueprinting, like I mentioned earlier, you want to do infrastructure as code, you want to manage the state of a database over its life cycle and attach automation to that. You want to integrate not just with Bash and PowerShell, but Ansible, Chef, Salt, all the other automation frameworks. You want to integrate into your ServiceNow and automatically update your CI records or expose your service catalog inside of your ServiceNow interface. Those are things that Morpheus Enterprise starts to bring to the table, as well as the opportunity to not only do VMware and KVM, but also Nutanix, Microsoft, Oracle, AWS, all of those other clouds. So you can think about Morpheus as a family. It has 2 members, the VM Essentials member and the Enterprise member, but both of them include that built-in KVM runtime. And as of last month, that is now the software stack that is inside HPE's private cloud portfolio. So Private Cloud Business Edition now ships with Morpheus VM Essentials as its default control plane. HPE Private Cloud Enterprise ships with Morpheus Enterprise as its default control plane. So we now have a unified software stack inside the entire HPE private cloud portfolio, which is pretty cool, and it opens up some real interesting use cases for you. That's this common control plane, right? We're taking that DNA and we are threading it throughout the portfolio. And that also means you can start with something based on the Essentials version. And if you decide, wow, this is great, but I really need some of those upstack capabilities. I'm interested in FinOps and a common chargeback model and cost optimization and some of the features that Morpheus Enterprise has. Well, that's just an upgrade SKU. It's a new license. You stack it on top of the old one. You don't even have to reinstall the software. You just get an instant upgrade. So those are some of the capabilities that we're bringing into HPE. It's been real exciting to kind of come back. Like I said, I was at HPE before, came back through the acquisition, and I'm just super excited to talk to you guys, help you rethink how you're thinking about the cloud operating model, reduce your vendor dependence, give you some options, and help you stop thinking about virtualization, because who wants to do that? But we'll help you along the way. So that's what I've got for you today. Hopefully you learned something new. Thanks, hope you have a great rest of your Discover.